Do avoidants miss you, or do they just miss having control over your emotions? What if that text they sent you at 2 a.m. wasn't actually about missing you at all? You know exactly what I'm talking about. That message that shows up when you least expect it, just a casual, hope you're doing well, that somehow feels heavy with unspoken meaning. But here's the thing about the timing. It's never actually random. These messages have a way of appearing precisely when you've finally stopped checking your phone, stopped wondering what they're up to, stopped organizing your emotional world around their unpredictable availability. Avoidants have this uncanny ability to resurface just when you think you've moved on. They reach out with what feels like genuine longing, making you wonder if they've finally realized what they lost. They say they miss you, they want to see you, they've been thinking about what went wrong. And for a moment, you think maybe this time will be different. But what if none of that contact is actually about missing you? What if it's about something else entirely? Something that has nothing to do with love and everything to do with control. When you start peeling back the layers of avoidant behavior, what looks like missing you on the surface reveals itself to be something much more calculated and self-serving underneath. Layer 1 is what everyone sees, the romantic narrative. This is the story we tell ourselves when an avoidant reaches out after distance or silence. We interpret their contact as evidence that they've been thinking about us, that they regret pulling away, that they're finally ready to try again. This layer feels real because their messages often contain exactly the right words to make you believe they're having genuine feelings. They mention specific memories you shared. They reference inside jokes or meaningful moments. They seem vulnerable when they admit they've been thinking about you. The romantic narrative is compelling because it fits what we want to believe about human connection. When someone reaches out, especially someone who previously seemed indifferent, we naturally assume it means they care about us. We think their contact represents some kind of emotional breakthrough or realization about our value. But this surface layer is often the most misleading because it mistakes the symptom for the cause. Their reaching out isn't necessarily evidence of missing you. It's evidence of missing something. But what they're missing might be entirely different from what you think. Peel back that romantic layer and you'll find layer 2, the ego bruise. This is where avoidance contact becomes less about you and more about their own psychological comfort. They're not necessarily missing your presence in their life. They're missing the ego boost that came from knowing you wanted them. Avoidants are deeply uncomfortable with being forgotten or becoming irrelevant. Even though they create distance and act like they don't need connection, they have a profound need to remain significant in people's lives. When you stop pursuing them, stop reaching out, stop showing signs that you're thinking about them, it threatens their sense of importance. Their missing you messages often correlate directly with signs that you've moved on. They reach out when they see you looking happy on social media, when mutual friends mention you're dating someone new, or when enough time has passed that they realize you haven't contacted them. This isn't conscious calculation in most cases. It's an unconscious response to feeling like they're losing significance in your life. The message that says, "I miss you," is really saying, "I miss being important to you," or "I miss knowing that you want me even when I don't want you back." This layer explains why their contact often feels perfectly timed to disrupt your healing process. They're not reaching out because they genuinely want to reconnect. They're reaching out because your absence is threatening their ego and they need reassurance that they still matter to you. Strip away the ego layer and you'll discover layer 3, the control test. This is where avoidant contact reveals its true function as a way of maintaining psychological power in the dynamic between you. They're not missing you. They're missing the control they had over your emotional state. When an avoidant reaches out after a period of distance, they're testing whether they still have the ability to affect you. They want to know if they can still make you drop everything to respond, if they can still create hope where you'd built acceptance, if they can still disrupt your emotional equilibrium with minimal effort on their part. The timing of their contact is rarely about their emotional state and almost always about yours. They reach out when you seem stable, when you appear to be moving forward, when you've stopped giving them the emotional attention they'd grown accustomed to receiving. This control testing serves a specific psychological function. It maintains their sense of power in the relationship dynamic, even when they're not actively participating in the relationship. They get to remain the person who can create emotional responses in you without having to reciprocate those emotions or commit to any kind of consistent connection. When you respond to their contact with enthusiasm, availability, or hope, you're confirming that they still have control over your emotional state. When you don't respond or respond with indifference, it threatens their sense of power and often triggers more intensive attempts to regain that control. This layer explains why their follow-through rarely matches their initial contact. They're not reaching out to rebuild connection. They're reaching out to confirm they could rebuild connection if they wanted to. Once they've established that power still exists, they often lose interest in actually using it. Dig deeper, and you'll find layer 4, the safety blanket syndrome. Avoidants don't necessarily miss you as a person. They miss having you as a reliable source of validation that they can access whenever their self-esteem needs a boost. You represent emotional security they can tap into without having to provide emotional security in return. This layer reveals why avoidants often maintain contact with multiple people they've been involved with romantically. They're not keeping their options open for future relationships. They're maintaining a network of people who represent emotional resources they can access when needed. When an avoidant reaches out to you, they're often not comparing you to other potential partners or considering you for a romantic future. They're accessing you as an emotional resource, much like someone might keep emergency money in different bank accounts. You're not their first choice for connection. You're their backup plan for validation. This explains why their contact often feels shallow despite seeming personal. They're not actually interested in your life, your thoughts, or your experiences since you last spoke. They're interested in whether you still care about them enough to respond positively to their attention. The conversations that follow their initial contact usually reveal this dynamic clearly. They ask how you're doing but don't really listen to your answers. They share surface-level updates about their life but avoid any real vulnerability. They create enough interaction to confirm your continued interest, but not enough to require genuine emotional investment from them. This layer is particularly painful to recognize because it means accepting that someone you cared about deeply was treating you as an emotional convenience rather than a meaningful connection. Peel away the safety blanket layer and you'll find layer 5, the collection maintenance. This is perhaps the most disturbing layer because it reveals that avoidants often view past romantic connections as possessions they need to maintain ownership of, even when they have no intention of actually using those possessions. Avoidants have a deep psychological need to feel like people they've been involved with remain somehow available to them, even when they're not available in return. It's like keeping clothes in your closet that you never wear, but don't want anyone else to have. They don't want you, but they don't want you to be completely free of their influence either. This collection maintenance explains why avoidants often become more interested in you when you start dating someone else, but lose interest again once they've disrupted your new relationship. They're not jealous because they want to be with you. They're territorial because they consider you part of their emotional collection. Their periodic contact serves to maintain a thread of connection that keeps you psychologically linked to them. They don't want a relationship with you, but they want to preserve the possibility of your attention and availability for some undefined future moment when they might need it. This layer reveals why trying to be friends with an avoidant after a romantic connection rarely works for the other person. You think you're maintaining a genuine friendship, but they're maintaining ownership. You think you're both moving forward, but they're keeping you in a holding pattern. The collection maintenance dynamic is why no contact is often the only effective strategy for moving on from an avoidant. Any contact, no matter how casual or friendly, feeds their need to maintain possession of your emotional availability. Dig down to layer 6 and you'll find the core truth, the nostalgia trap. This is where you discover that when avoidants say they miss you, they're not missing you as a complete person with your own needs, dreams, and emotional reality. They're missing a fantasy version of you that existed only in moments when you were meeting their needs without requiring them to meet yours in return. They miss the version of you who was endlessly patient with their emotional unavailability. They miss the you who accommodated their need for space without asking for emotional intimacy in return. They miss the you who accepted their minimal effort while providing maximum understanding and support. When they reach out saying they miss you, they're really saying they miss having someone who loved them without conditions, who accepted breadcrumbs of attention as if they were full meals, who made them feel valued and important without requiring them to reciprocate those feelings consistently. This nostalgia isn't about missing a relationship. It's about missing a dynamic where they received all the benefits of being loved without any of the responsibilities of loving someone back. They miss feeling important to someone who didn't make them feel obligated to be important to that person in return. This layer explains why their attempts to reconnect never involve acknowledging how their behavior affected you or expressing genuine interest in meeting your emotional needs differently. They want to recreate the exact dynamic that didn't work before because that dynamic served their psychological needs perfectly, even though it left your needs completely unmet. The nostalgia trap is why responding to their contact with anything other than complete indifference usually results in disappointment. They're not reaching out because they've developed the capacity to love you better. They're reaching out because they miss being loved without having to reciprocate. At the deepest layer, you'll find the ultimate truth. Avoidants don't miss you. They miss the power dynamic where they were valued without having to value, desired without having to desire, and important without having to make anyone else feel important. Every text, every call, every casual reach out is ultimately about testing whether that power dynamic is still available to them. They're not missing your laugh, your conversation, your presence in their life. They're missing the feeling of being the center of someone's emotional world without having to let that person be the center of theirs. This realization is devastating but liberating. It means their contact has nothing to do with your worth, your compatibility, or your potential future together. It means you can stop analyzing their messages for hidden meanings or signs of change. It means you can recognize their reach-outs for what they really are, attempts to maintain psychological control over someone they never intended to truly love. But here's where it gets more complex for those currently dealing with avoidance. Understanding these layers doesn't automatically make you immune to their effects. Even when you intellectually know their miss you message is really about control, your emotional system might still respond with hope, excitement, or the old familiar pattern of dropping everything to give them attention. This is because avoidants are incredibly skilled at finding the exact words and timing that will trigger your emotional responses, even when your logical mind knows better. They've learned your patterns, your triggers, your emotional weak spots through months or years of observing your reactions to their behavior. If you're currently involved with an avoidant, you might notice they become more persistent when you start applying these insights. When you stop responding immediately to their messages, they might escalate their contact attempts. When you don't show excitement about their sudden availability, they might become more romantic or vulnerable in their approach. This escalation isn't evidence that they're finally realizing your worth. It's evidence that their usual control methods aren't working and they need to try harder to regain psychological power over your emotional state. It's like someone pushing an elevator button multiple times when it doesn't come immediately. They're not appreciating the elevator more, they're just trying different strategies to get what they want. For people in ongoing relationships with avoidance, recognizing these patterns becomes crucial for maintaining your emotional well-being. That spontaneous invitation to dinner after days of emotional distance isn't necessarily a breakthrough moment. It might be their response to sensing that you're becoming less emotionally available to them. Pay attention to what happens after these moments of increased attention. Do they follow through with consistent emotional connection, or do they return to their usual pattern of distance once they've confirmed your continued interest? The answer usually reveals whether their increased effort was about genuine desire for closeness or about re-establishing control. One of the most painful realizations for people loving avoidance is understanding that the person they're with might be more invested in maintaining the option of your love than in actually receiving and reciprocating that love. This explains why avoidants often seem most interested when you're least available and least interested when you're most willing to connect. This dynamic creates a particularly cruel psychological trap. The more you try to give them the consistent love and connection they claim to want, the less interested they become. The more you pull back to protect yourself, the more they pursue. It's like being in a relationship with someone who only wants what they can't have. For those currently navigating this dynamic, it's important to understand that you're not crazy for feeling confused and exhausted. The avoidance behavior patterns are designed to create exactly the uncertainty and emotional chaos you're experiencing. Their inconsistency isn't accidental. It's functional for maintaining control while avoiding genuine emotional vulnerability. The intermittent reinforcement they provide, occasional moments of warmth and connection followed by withdrawal, creates what psychologists recognize as one of the most addictive reward schedules possible. You're not weak for having difficulty breaking free from these patterns. You're having a normal response to a deliberately destabilizing dynamic. Understanding why avoidants operate this way can help you make more informed decisions about how to protect your emotional well-being. When you recognize that their behavior isn't really about you, isn't about your worth, your lovability, or your potential together, you can start responding to their patterns instead of reacting to them. This might mean setting boundaries around when and how you're available for contact. It might mean refusing to drop your plans when they suddenly want attention. It might mean not reading deeper meaning into their surface-level gestures of care or interest. Most importantly, it means recognizing that someone's inability to love you consistently says nothing about your worthiness of love and everything about their emotional limitations. You can't create security with someone whose nervous system treats genuine emotional connection as a threat. The goal isn't to become bitter or cynical about love. It's to become more discerning about the difference between someone who struggles with intimacy but is working toward growth, and someone who uses their struggles as a way to maintain power without responsibility in relationships. Real change in avoidant behavior looks like consistent effort over time, not sporadic gestures when they sense you pulling away. It looks like them taking responsibility for how their patterns affect you, not just expecting you to understand and accommodate their limitations indefinitely. If you're dealing with an avoidant who shows genuine self-awareness about their patterns and is actively working to change them, that's different from someone who uses their attachment style as an excuse to avoid emotional accountability while maintaining access to your emotional resources. The difference matters because it determines whether you're in a relationship with growth potential or whether you're providing emotional labor for someone who has no intention of reciprocating consistently, regardless of how much they claim to care about you. Understanding these layers of avoidant behavior isn't about judging them as bad people. Many avoidants are genuinely unaware of these patterns and would be horrified to realize the impact their behavior has on people who love them. But understanding doesn't require you to accept treatment that consistently leaves you feeling emotionally starved and confused. When someone truly misses you, they miss your entire reality, your thoughts, your growth, your happiness, your struggles. They want to contribute to your life, not just extract validation from it. They reach out because they want to give something, not just because they need to take something. When an avoidant reaches out, they miss the idea of you that serves their psychological needs, not the reality of you as a complete person with your own emotional requirements and life trajectory. The difference is profound, and recognizing it can save you from years of accepting emotional scraps from someone who was never actually hungry for genuine connection with you. There's one more layer that's crucial to understand, especially if you're someone who keeps going back to an avoidant despite recognizing these patterns. Sometimes we stay not because we believe they'll change, but because we've become addicted to the challenge of earning love from someone who withholds it. The intermittent validation becomes more powerful than consistent love from someone else would be. If you find yourself making excuses like they're just scared, or they need more time, or I'm the only one who really understands them, you might be dealing with your own attachment wounds that make unavailable people feel familiar and safe. Sometimes the person who can't love you consistently feels more comfortable than someone who could, because consistent love feels foreign or overwhelming to your own nervous system. This isn't about blaming yourself for staying in these dynamics. It's about recognizing that healing sometimes requires addressing not just what the avoidant is doing to you, But what drew you to someone emotionally unavailable in the first place? Real growth often means becoming comfortable with the kind of love that doesn't require you to prove your worth constantly. When you can receive consistent love without feeling suspicious, bored, or like you need to earn it, you'll naturally lose interest in people who make love feel like a game you have to win. The goal isn't to change the avoidant, it's to change what feels normal and acceptable to you in relationships. Have you experienced this pattern of avoidance reaching out just when you've started to move on? Share in the comments what you realized about their true motivations. If this helped you see through the layers of avoidant contact, like this video and subscribe for more insights about recognizing the difference between genuine connection and psychological manipulation. Thanks for watching.